AM-VHF monitor radio kit. Look at the box. Firemen, police, air traffic controllers. All that excitement could be brought to your bedroom if only you nagged your parents to buy you this kit.
Fortunately, I didn't need to do that because a local charity shop had this for sale cheap, and I couldn't resist.
How does it perform? Keep watching and I'll give you a demonstration. The brand is Science Fair, which means it was sold through Tandy or Radio Shack stores. Looking at it, I'd say it's probably maybe 1980s, and we'll just give you a look at the box first of all. These actually almost look like AI pictures, but of course you didn't have that back then. Looking at the blurb, works like a regular AM radio and also lets you hear police and other emergency radio transmissions. You can even listen to pilots talk to air traffic controllers. So it's catalogue number 28-163, which I'm sure someone's documented somewhere on the web, so we'll look at that in a moment. And a bit more detail here. It's a 2-band receiver, so you've got the normal AM broadcast band as well as 108 to 170 megahertz. Let's look at the history of this kit through old Radio Shack catalogues. You can see them online at radioshackcatalogues.com. 1984's catalogue had a dedicated VHF action radio kit for $14.95. Covering 108 to 174 megahertz, it said that you could hear police, aircraft and weather. Nothing covering that range in the 1986 catalogue, but a year later, in 1987, was where the kit that I'm reviewing first appears. Described as an AM-VHF project kit, it was do-it-yourself listening to police, aviation and weather bands. It covered 108 to 135 and 148 to 174 megahertz, but it was actually continuous coverage. Anyway, that sold for $12.95. That kit continued for quite a long time, with its last appearance being in the 1998 catalogue. Its price was similar at $12.99. You may have craved one of these as a child and never had a chance to see what it was like. Keep watching this video as we'll see if this works or not. Now, we've got the instructions here, and this is the kit, so it looks like that someone actually built it. There are 2 variable capacitors here. I'm guessing this one is lower in capacitance, VHF tuner, and an AM tuner. The main parts I've mentioned, a ferrite rod here just for the AM bit, larger variable capacitor for the AM portion, or should I say medium wave portion. As I mentioned before, this was for the VHF section. So if you wanted to change bands, this was like 2 kits in one. You had to rewire it and then you'd be able to go to VHF. Underneath, the parts would have come in bags, and here is the earpiece. Unusual for kits, it's a magnetic earpiece, it's low impedance, whereas crystal set type radio kits normally had a crystal earpiece, which was a little bit bigger. It was often a sort of an orangish in colour, and that relied on the piezoelectric effect. A crystal earpiece that was higher impedance and more sensitive for very weak signals. But since we've got some transistor amplification in this circuit, the magnetic earpiece, which is more common, was the one that was chosen for this kit. Other parts, you can see there's a germanium diode, and a transistor here. So this would have been for the possibly the RF portion. We don't know yet. We'd have to look at the circuit. And here you've got mainly resistors, disc ceramic capacitors, and 2 transistors. And this is definitely the audio part of the receiver. Since I've just mentioned the VHF section, let's turn this over and see what you get. This is the variable capacitor. This is the higher value for the medium wave part of the circuit. This is the board for VHF. And that is a variable capacitor, much smaller in value, probably only up to maybe 20 picofarad. And you can see there's a coil here with some stuff to keep it rigid. The transistor, this would be a VHF transistor, a couple of other coils, and some low value capacitors. So this would be, I suspect, a super regenerative receiver. Just one transistor, not yet sure if it's a bipolar or a FET. And you might have seen super regen receivers before in some of my earlier videos, but this is super regen receiver. Doesn't seem to be any way you can vary the amount of regeneration. Some circuits you just don't need to. You just apply power, hopefully it hisses, and it will usually pick up the strongest signal in the area on VHF. So the output from that goes into the audio amplifier and then to the earphone. First we have a table of contents. You are about to start building a simple but practical electronic kit. You will have hours of fun putting it together and years of pleasure as you use it to listen to AM and VHF radio signals. So just a brief description of how it works and the process of detection. It does require a few basic tools, just screwdriver, pliers, wire cutters, a 9-volt battery. Here, there's a lot of detail. I won't go through them, but basically, if you want to operate the AM radio, you've got different connections to VHF because you're basically using 2 different sources. Near the end, a circuit diagram. Receiver operating on the AM broadcast band. So it's a 3 transistor circuit, and 3 transistors means that if you're in a metropolitan area, you should be able to hear stations without an external antenna. So that's what we'll try first. Now, VHF, a common base type circuit. Often you use common base circuits because that operates better at higher frequencies. So this will be a super regenerative receiver. They have provided the values, and as you can see, they're quite small for capacitors. There's 7 picofarad there, and then it feeds from that module on the circuit board into the 2 transistor audio amplifier. Finally, we have the parts list, and they do identify the transistors in full, 2SC series. So if you wanted to, you could actually rebuild this from your own parts, but it may be a bit hard to get the small variable capacitor. Did the original builder tick everything or not? They only got up to here. Maybe they gave up ticking things because all the transistors are installed. So might just be a matter of checking to see if their wiring's okay, applying power and seeing if this actually works. Here is their warranty, Tandy Intertan. That may date it. And you had Intertan Australia. So this is when they were based at Mount Druitt. And I'm pretty sure Dave Jones of the EV blog had a job there. So that was in Western Sydney. And then Radio Shack, Fort Worth, Texas. And this was printed in Taiwan. Just checking the wires, and so far they've been wired up correctly. This one is loose, so I'll just put that back. Forgot to check the orientation of the transistors. Let's compare this with the pack. That's right. That one there. That one's okay. And this one, that's fine. That electrolytic will be polarized, and that's negative, so that's okay. The diode there, yep, that looks fine. Nine-volt battery, yeah, yep, tongue test works. This is our nearest station, probably about 15-20 kilometers away. And just a reminder, I'm using this radio right on the ground, no external antenna. The selectivity seems quite good.
After so many years of his life spent working in this field, to be recognised like this, well, it's excellent. Of course, don't get too excited. Hopefully we'll be. This guy, Michael Leffler,
ABC 774, very strong.
Kid, he's been taking him to camps, he's been talking to coaches, been talking to potential colleges, and he said, look, we've got a real problem.
And the radio is quite directional because of the ferrite rod antenna. It's very faint, but I think I can just hear a station about 100 kilometers away. Just had a look at the instructions, and it refers to an external antenna. 5 meters of wire. It was missing from my kit, but I've got 5 meters here. And just looking at it, it says connect the long yellow wire 5 meters to terminal 12. And when you're reading that, you'd think that applied for both AM and VHF reception. So I tried to find where terminal 12 was, and it took me a while to find it. Certainly wouldn't be in the audio amplifier. It wasn't in the AM tuner section, but it was actually in the VHF section. So connecting a wire to this wouldn't affect the AM reception, as it's not actually connected to anything. And you can confirm that when you go through the circuit diagram. Here you've got terminal 12. This is the VHF super regen circuit. Here there's no terminal 12. So I think there's actually a bit of an error, or at least it's not very clear in the diagram. Now if I was connecting an external antenna to this, since this does have a bit of gain, I would do so through a low value capacitor. Now I've got a few meters of wire, only about 2 meters, but we'll just use these sunflowers as an antenna support, because even if you've got 1 meter above the ground, makes a huge difference compared to if it was just lying on the ground. With the antenna connected, it's almost ear-shattering on the stronger stations.
I was only joking, and it was all to do with a compliment. Here's a compliment that he was. Now the education department is being downsized. A death by a few thousand cuts, it would seem. Professor Derek Black from South Carolina University is also there on the ABC list. 774 ABC Radio Melbourne. Your home of footy. A 3-seater. Nicholas Hines with ABC News.
the Federal Trade Minister says he doesn't believe the US ever intended on granting Australia an exemption from steel and aluminium tariffs. The Trump administration today confirmed Australia would not be exempt from the 25% tariff on imports of the products, despite earlier saying it would consider one. Don Farrell has told Sky News it's a bad day for the relationship with the US, but the government hasn't given up on the prospect of a future exemption.
Overall, connecting the antenna has made stronger signals much louder. It has reduced selectivity. If you wanted to overcome that, you'd put a low value of capacitor, preferably a variable capacitor, in series with the antenna. Or alternatively, you'd couple the antenna. You could connect one end to the earth, but then just have one or two turns over the ferrite rod to loosely couple the antenna into the receiver. Then you'd have both good sensitivity and good selectivity. VHF radio connected. That's encouraging. The hiss means that the super regenerative part of the circuit is oscillating. Even with no antenna connected, it's picking up signals from the top end of the FM broadcast band. Always good to have a comparison device when you're testing a receiver, especially one as rudimentary as this. This is my little handheld super regen that I made for the aircraft band, and just putting in a 9-volt battery.
We're off complete and sensing in about 15 miles.
As you can hear, I'm getting aircraft band signals. I am hearing some FM stations, top end of the FM broadcast band. So that's handy as a marker, so we know that at the bottom of the tuning range, this side of the box says it goes from 108. In fact, I think it's going a bit lower, which is around 106, 107. When you have two super regen receivers right next to each other, then they will interact if you put them on the same frequency. This could be handy to help with frequency calibration, as I have crudely calibrated this receiver. Just noticed something. These screws are a bit loose, so I'll tighten them and that will hopefully make the receiver a bit more stable. I've just done that, but listen and hear what happens to the hiss at various parts of the tuning range. It's okay for most of it, but down here at the bottom end, it drops off. I've just replaced the battery and it's better. With super regen receivers, it's critical that you have a good battery. Another thing that can also help is having a capacitor, say 100 microfarad, across the supply line. Here we're at the very bottom of the tuning range on the VHF section, and you can hear some FM stations. If you wanted to hear more FM stations, then you'd compress the turns of this winding in. Then you'd lose top-end VHF coverage though. I can hear a plane. Let's see if I can also hear a signal from it.
Downwind 17 right, Lima Papa. 1500 inbound with Oscar.
What's my summary of this? The AM section is good. In most areas it will pick up stations even without an antenna, and there's an improvement when you do add an antenna. VHF though is a bit flaky, and it probably has been the case for at least 40 years. In fact, even when this kit came out, I suspect that performance would have been marginal on anything but aircraft signals, because fire, police, ambulance, all the things you'd expect went from AM to FM in, I'd say, early 1970s in most areas. So even when this kit was on the shelves, the VHF section would be partly obsolete in most areas, unless you're near an airport. Overall, the VHF section would have been a bit of a letdown for a child, especially given all the images on the box. If they were spoilt and their parents were rich, then that would just mean another trip to Radio Shack or Tandy to get a VHF UHF scanner, which for a few $100s would have allowed reception of police, fire, ambulance and more with ease. Do you want to get the most from your portable QRP operating? Good Antennas is a great place to start. Find out how I succeed with my 2 books, Hand-Carried QRP Antennas and More Hand-Carried QRP Antennas. They're big sellers with favourable reviews from all around the world. To learn more, visit VK3YE.com or search the titles on Amazon.